Across America's western parks, something is lining up, and no one wants to say it out loud. Skilled hikers walk into familiar trails and never come back. No distress calls, no bodies, no clear evidence. Just empty backpacks and search crews chasing nothing. When investigators plotted the disappearances, a chilling shape appeared on the map. Why do so many vanish in the same places? What connects these parks, and what keeps pulling people in? Where the first unresolved cases are recorded. In official records maintained and published by the United States National Park Service, incidents involving missing persons within park boundaries are documented as part of routine search and rescue operations. These records include names, dates, last known locations, and the status of each investigation as it stands at the time of reporting. The National Park Service itself notes that missing person investigations may result from a range of circumstances including accidents, weather exposure, or disorientation, and that some cases become cold cases when no active leads remain. Within Yosemite National Park in California's Sierra Nevada, multiple unresolved missing person cases appear in the official public roster of cold cases maintained by the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch. Among them is the case of Peter Jackson, a 74-year-old hiker who was reported missing on the 17th of September, 2016. Jackson was believed to have embarked on a day hike from his campsite at White Wolf Campground, but never returned to camp. Search efforts transitioned to limited continuous mode when no evidence of his whereabouts was found, and items such as his day pack were later located in the Ackerson Meadow, Aspen Valley area without clear indication of his path or position after the initial disappearance. Also listed from Yosemite is the unresolved disappearance of Walter H. Reinhard, who went missing on the 30th of September, 2002. Reinhard's vehicle was found parked at the White Wolf trailhead, and he was likely to have started a hike from that point. No definitive evidence confirming his movements or fate has been published in official records. Yosemite's unresolved cases stretch back further. Michael Fissery, age 51, was reported missing on the 21st of June, 2005, while hiking in the Tiltil Valley area northeast of Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. As of the last available public status, park records do not indicate a conclusive resolution to that case. Across the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona, the National Park Service's cold case documentation also contains multiple unresolved cases. One such case involves Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old man last seen on the 2nd of June 2015 near the Colorado River at about mile 213. Search efforts entered continuous limited mode but did not locate him or provide definitive information about his departure from contact. Another unresolved case at the Grand Canyon is that of Floyd E. Roberts III, age 52, who was reported missing on the 17th of June 2016 while hiking in remote parts of the canyon's western reaches. Park records describe conditions of extreme heat and terrain challenges during the initial days of search efforts, but no conclusive findings have been publicly disclosed. Jonghyun Won, a 45-year-old man from Los Angeles, was reported missing at the Grand Canyon on the 17th of September 2017. His vehicle, a white Toyota Camry, was found at Morin Point on the South Rim, yet no further trace of his movements has been documented in the official cold case roster. Beyond these documented entries, more recent reports from mid-2025 describe ongoing search operations at the Grand Canyon National Park for 35-year-old Thomas Daniel Gibbs, who was reported missing after his abandoned vehicle was located at the Grand View Point parking lot on the 30th of July, 2025. Park officials noted that crews remained deployed and were seeking information from visitors who may have been in the area of the Grandview Trail and Horseshoe Mesa on the day he was last heard from. In addition to these specific unresolved cases, broader documentation indicates that Yosemite alone has had dozens of missing person reports that are still unresolved. Estimates from independent reporting suggest that more than 30 cases in that park remain without a conclusive outcome, reflecting the challenges of search and rescue in rugged wilderness environments. Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming and Montana also features in public discussion about unresolved missing persons, though most missing hikers are ultimately found. One widely cited unresolved case in Yellowstone is that of Dan Campbell, who was last seen in April 1991 after being dropped off at the Hell-Roaring Creek trailhead. Despite extensive efforts, neither he nor his dog were located. Across these parks, the unresolved cases span decades and terrains from high alpine forests to steep canyon walls. The records themselves consist primarily of factual statements: the person's name, age, date of last contact, and the location where they were last seen or their vehicle was found. In many instances, search protocols are described, sometimes noting conditions such as extreme heat, rugged terrain, or the transition of search operations to limited continuous mode when prospects of immediate discovery diminish. Publicly available cold case rosters and incident reports do not provide explanations as to why the individuals remain missing. They refrain from attributing cause beyond the observable facts of disappearance and the documented lack of subsequent evidence. These records also do not include speculative context about patterns or connections between cases. What appears in official documentation is factual and focused on the procedural aspects of each investigation. Within the terrain where these unresolved cases are recorded, whether the steep ridges of Yosemite's high country or the deep labyrinthine corridors of the Grand Canyon, the official files remain unchanged since the last update. Names, dates, and locations are fixed in time as part of each park's public missing person documentation. While search and rescue operations may respond when new information arises, the unresolved status of these cases persists in the records themselves, the landscapes that shaped every search. Search and rescue operations in United States national parks are conducted within environments that vary widely in elevation, vegetation, geology, and climate. These physical conditions determine how quickly a search can begin, how long evidence remains visible, and what tools can be used. In official National Park Service training materials and after-action reports, terrain is consistently identified as one of the primary factors influencing search outcomes. In Yosemite National Park, much of the backcountry consists of steep granite formations, alpine meadows, and densely forested valleys. Elevations range from approximately 2,000 feet to more than 13,000 feet. Snow may remain on shaded slopes into early summer. Afternoon thunderstorms are common between June and September. These conditions affect visibility, ground stability, and air support. Helicopters cannot operate safely in certain wind corridors, and ground teams must often move slowly across exposed rock surfaces. Search records from Yosemite indicate that many operations begin at trailheads or campsites where vehicles, permits, or personal belongings are located. From these points, teams establish probable travel routes based on maps, visitor statements, and known hiking patterns. According to NPS incident reports, initial ground searches typically focus on trails, waterways, and steep drop-offs. In open granite areas, footprints and scuff marks may be visible for only a short period before wind and temperature changes erase them. In Yellowstone National Park, terrain conditions differ substantially. The park contains large forested plateaus, geothermal basins, and river valleys. Soil in many areas is composed of volcanic ash and sediment. In wet conditions, footprints can be preserved briefly. In dry periods, they disappear quickly. Thermal features such as hot springs and fumaroles create additional hazards. Park policy restricts off-trail travel in these zones, limiting search access. Yellowstone search documentation notes that scent tracking dogs are frequently deployed in forested areas and river corridors. However, geothermal activity and shifting winds can interfere with scent patterns. In several unresolved cases, search teams reported losing scent trails near water crossings or thermal basins. Once this occurs, recovery becomes significantly more difficult. At Mount Rainier National Park in Washington, the dominant environmental factor is glaciation. More than 25 major glaciers cover large portions of the mountain. Crevasses, ice falls, and seasonal snow bridges create unstable surfaces. Even experienced climbers are vulnerable to sudden collapses. Park search reports show that glacier travel requires specialized teams trained in rope rescue and ice navigation. Weather at Mount Rainier can change rapidly. Cloud cover often forms without warning, reducing visibility to a few meters. Wind speeds at higher elevations regularly exceed 50 miles per hour. These conditions limit aerial reconnaissance and force ground teams to retreat. Official records show that several searches have been suspended repeatedly due to unsafe weather. In Grand Canyon National Park, the terrain presents a different set of constraints. The canyon extends more than 270 miles and reaches depths exceeding 1 mile. Trails descend through multiple geological layers, each with distinct erosion patterns. Summer temperatures in the inner canyon regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dehydration and heat exhaustion are common medical emergencies. Search and rescue manuals for the Grand Canyon emphasize water availability and vertical exposure as central concerns. Many missing person reports originate from rim viewpoints or trail junctions. From these locations, hundreds of potential routes are possible. Loose rock and narrow ledges increase the risk of falls. If a person leaves established trails, tracking becomes extremely difficult. Vegetation density also plays a role. In lower canyon regions, thorny shrubs and cacti limit movement and obscure visibility. In higher elevations, pine forests create shaded corridors where visual searches are restricted. Aerial teams must adjust flight paths to account for updrafts and downdrafts created by temperature gradients within the canyon walls. Across all major western parks, water systems influence search patterns. Rivers, creeks, and seasonal streams can transport personal items far from their origin. In Yosemite, the Merced River and its tributaries are frequently searched following disappearances. In Yellowstone, the Yellowstone River and Lamar River receive similar attention. In the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River presents both a search corridor and a barrier. Official NPS reports indicate that water recovery operations require coordination with specialized dive teams and downstream agencies. Turbulence, sediment, and seasonal flooding reduce the likelihood of locating submerged objects. In many unresolved cases, waterways were searched repeatedly without result. Search planning relies heavily on probability mapping. Using statistical models, incident commanders assign likelihood values to different zones based on terrain, weather, and known behavior patterns. These maps are updated as new information emerges. The methodology is documented in NPS search and rescue management guidelines and training manuals. However, terrain irregularities limit the precision of these models. Cliff systems, talus slopes, and dense undergrowth create shadow zones where neither aerial nor ground observation is effective. These areas are marked in operational maps but cannot always be safely entered. Over time, some zones remain unsearched due to persistent hazards. Technology has expanded search capabilities but has not eliminated environmental constraints. GPS tracking, infrared imaging, and satellite communication are now standard tools. Drones are used in limited areas where permitted. Despite these advances, NPS after-action reviews frequently note that technology cannot penetrate dense canopy, deep ravines, or underground features. Cave systems and lava tubes present additional challenges in some parks, including parts of Yellowstone and Lava Beds National Monument. These environments require specialized teams and equipment. In several documented cases, underground features were searched only after surface efforts yielded no results, sometimes weeks after initial disappearance. Seasonal changes further complicate operations. Snowfall can cover tracks within hours. Spring runoff alters riverbanks and washes away evidence. Autumn leaf fall conceals ground disturbances. Winter access restrictions prevent entry into large areas for months at a time. Search reports regularly document these delays. Coordination between agencies is also shaped by terrain. In steep or remote regions, local sheriff departments, military aviation units, and volunteer rescue organizations may be involved. Communication infrastructure is limited in many park areas. Radio dead zones are mapped, but equipment failures still occur. In official summaries, terrain is consistently cited as the dominant limiting factor in unresolved searches. The physical environment determines how long evidence remains visible, how far teams can safely travel, and whether certain areas can be examined at all. These constraints are documented without interpretation. Case files rarely include narrative descriptions of the landscape beyond operational terminology. Instead, they list slope angles, vegetation types, elevation ranges, and access points. These data points form the basis of search decisions and remain part of permanent records. Across decades of documentation, the same pattern appears. Search teams adapt to each environment using established protocols. They account for weather, geology, and vegetation. They record what can be reached and what cannot. When terrain prevents complete coverage, this limitation is noted. The landscape does not appear in these files as a dramatic backdrop. It is treated as a logistical variable. It shapes movement, restricts vision, and defines risk. Its influence is recorded in maps, reports, and suspension notices. These records remain as technical descriptions of how each search unfolded on the ground, how every disappearance entered the system. When a visitor is reported missing in a United States national park, the response follows a formal structure established by the National Park Service Search and Rescue Program. This framework is outlined in internal policy documents, operational manuals, and interagency agreements that govern how incidents are classified, documented, and managed. The procedures are designed to standardize responses across parks with different sizes, terrains, and staffing levels. The process typically begins when a report is received by park dispatch or visitor services. Reports may come from family members, fellow hikers, campground hosts, concession staff, or outside law enforcement agencies. In some cases, the first indication is an unattended vehicle, an unclaimed campsite, or an overdue backcountry permit. Each report is logged with a timestamp and assigned an incident number. Dispatch personnel collect basic information using standardized forms. These include the individual's name, age, physical description, clothing, equipment, last known location, travel plans, and medical history if available. Witness statements are recorded in written or audio form. If the missing person holds a wilderness permit, rangers retrieve the associated itinerary and intended route. Once preliminary information is gathered, a duty officer evaluates whether the situation meets the criteria for a search and rescue activation. According to NPS policy, activation occurs when there is reasonable concern for a person's safety and no immediate explanation for their absence. Factors considered include weather conditions, terrain difficulty, time overdue, and experience level of the individual. If activation is approved, an incident command system structure is established. This system is used across federal and state emergency agencies and provides a standardized hierarchy for managing complex operations. An incident commander is appointed, usually a senior ranger or park official with search and rescue training. The commander is responsible for coordinating personnel, equipment, and communications. Under the incident commander, functional sections are created. These commonly include operations, planning, logistics, and finance. Each section is staffed by qualified personnel. Operations manages field teams. Planning analyzes data and produces search maps. Logistics handles supplies and transportation. Finance tracks expenditures and personnel hours. Search operations are organized into operational periods, typically lasting 12 to 24 hours. At the beginning of each period, a briefing is held. Team leaders receive assignments, maps, radio frequencies, and safety instructions. At the end of the period, a debriefing documents results, observations, and hazards encountered. Documentation is a central feature of the system. Every action is recorded in incident logs. Team movements, weather changes, equipment usage, and communication exchanges are entered into official forms. These records become part of the permanent case file and are later reviewed for training and administrative purposes. The planning section develops probability maps based on available information. Using established search theory models, planners estimate likely travel routes and areas of attraction, such as water sources, viewpoints, or shelter locations. These estimates are adjusted as new information becomes available. Maps are updated daily during active searches. Interagency coordination is governed by memoranda of understanding between the National Park Service and local authorities. County sheriff departments, state search teams, military aviation units, and volunteer organizations may be requested when additional resources are needed. Requests are routed through regional coordination centers to ensure compliance with jurisdictional rules. When outside agencies participate, they operate under unified command. This means that representatives from each organization share decision-making authority. Unified command prevents duplication of effort and standardizes safety procedures. All participating personnel are required to follow park regulations while operating within park boundaries. Air operations are regulated through specific protocols. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft are assigned mission numbers and flight plans. Air crews coordinate with ground teams through designated air-to-ground frequencies. Weather minimums and terrain clearance requirements are strictly enforced. Flight operations may be suspended without notice if conditions deteriorate. Medical response is integrated into search planning. Each field team carries first aid equipment and emergency signaling devices. Medical evacuation routes are identified in advance. In remote areas, evacuation may require extended carryouts or coordination with military aircraft capable of high-altitude operations. Communication systems are a recurring focus of operational planning. Parks maintain radio repeaters, satellite phones, and emergency beacons to compensate for limited cellular coverage. Dead zones are mapped and shared with teams. Despite these measures, communication failures are documented in after-action reports as a persistent challenge. Family liaison procedures are also part of the response system. A designated officer is assigned to communicate with relatives. This officer provides regular updates and records all interactions. Information released to the public is coordinated through park public affairs offices to prevent conflicting reports. As searches progress, command staff evaluate whether to continue full-scale operations. According to NPS guidelines, this decision is based on probability of survival, coverage achieved, environmental risks, and resource availability. When active searching no longer yields new information, operations may transition to limited continuous mode. Limited continuous mode involves periodic patrols, public notices, and monitoring of tips without sustained field deployment. This status is reviewed periodically, but may remain in place for years. The transition is documented in incident summaries and approved by regional administrators. Evidence handling follows law enforcement protocols when criminal activity cannot be ruled out. Personal items, vehicles, and electronic devices are cataloged and secured. Investigative services branch agents may be assigned if circumstances warrant. In most cases, however, missing person investigations remain under park jurisdiction. Training underpins all aspects of the system. Rangers assigned to search and rescue roles complete courses in wilderness navigation, technical rescue, incident command, and survival medicine. Annual refresher training is mandatory in many parks. Performance evaluations include participation in emergency operations. After-action reviews are conducted following major searches. These reviews analyze response time, coordination effectiveness, equipment performance, and safety incidents. Findings are circulated internally and used to revise protocols. Some recommendations become part of national policy updates. Federal budget allocations influence procedural capacity. Funding determines staffing levels, aircraft availability, and equipment upgrades. Internal reports note that resource constraints affect response speed in some regions, particularly during peak visitor seasons when multiple incidents occur simultaneously. Record retention policies ensure that case files are preserved. Digital records are stored in centralized databases. Paper documents are archived according to federal standards. These archives allow future investigators and researchers to review historical operations. Public access to procedural information is limited. While general guidelines are published on NPS websites, detailed operational plans and internal communications are typically exempt from disclosure. Requests under the Freedom of Information Act may produce partial records with redactions. Across different parks and decades, the structure remains consistent. Reports enter dispatch systems. Commands are established. Teams are deployed. Documentation accumulates. Decisions are reviewed and approved. The system emphasizes order, accountability, and risk management. Within this framework, individual cases are treated as operational tasks rather than narratives. Each file reflects a sequence of procedural steps carried out under established rules. The records show how responses are organized, measured, and concluded within institutional boundaries. What remains absent from the official files? Publicly accessible records related to missing persons in national parks are composed primarily of operational documents. These include incident reports, search maps, personnel logs, and administrative summaries. Together, they describe how an investigation was conducted. They do not attempt to reconstruct events beyond what can be verified. Over time, this structure has produced case files that are detailed in procedure, but limited in contextual explanation. Most files begin with an initial incident report. This document records the time the disappearance was reported, the identity of the missing person, and the circumstances known at that moment. In many cases, this information is incomplete. Witnesses may be unavailable. Travel plans may not have been clearly communicated. Personal journals, phones, or cameras are often not recovered. As a result, the starting point of many investigations is uncertain. Follow-up documentation focuses on search coverage rather than personal history. Maps show where teams traveled. Logs record how long each area was examined. Weather conditions are noted. Equipment usage is tracked. These materials indicate effort and scope, but they do not explain why a person may have deviated from an intended route or entered a hazardous area. Medical background information is rarely included in detail. Reports may indicate whether a person was known to have diabetes, heart conditions, or mobility limitations, but comprehensive medical records are not usually part of the file. Privacy laws restrict access to this information. Without it, investigators cannot always assess whether a medical episode may have contributed to an incident. Psychological and emotional factors are similarly absent. Official files do not evaluate stress, fatigue, or mental health unless there is documented evidence. Interviews with family members are summarized briefly. Statements are recorded without interpretation. The focus remains on verifiable facts rather than internal motivations. Electronic data is often limited. In recent decades, mobile phones, GPS devices, and fitness trackers have become more common. However, in many unresolved cases, these devices were either not carried, not recovered, or not functional. When devices are found, data extraction may be incomplete due to water damage, battery loss, or encryption. Vehicle records are another area of limitation. When a car is located at a trailhead or parking area, its presence confirms a starting point, but provides little additional information. Surveillance cameras are rare in remote park areas. Fuel receipts, toll records, and phone location data may be unavailable or outside park jurisdiction. Witness accounts are frequently fragmented. Visitors move through parks continuously. Many encounters are brief. A person may be seen resting on a bench, passing on a trail, or stopping at a viewpoint. These observations are recorded, but they rarely form a complete timeline. Gaps of several hours are common in case reconstructions. Environmental data is also incomplete. While weather stations record temperature, wind, and precipitation, conditions can vary significantly across short distances. A thunderstorm may affect one valley while leaving another dry. Snow accumulation may differ by slope exposure. These micro variations are difficult to document precisely. Search reports sometimes note potential hazards that were not fully explored. These may include unstable cliffs, flooded ravines, avalanche zones, or deep vegetation. Such areas are marked as unsafe or inaccessible. Once designated, they may remain unexamined for years. Files usually list these zones without further analysis. Underwater searches are similarly constrained. Rivers and lakes are examined when feasible, but visibility is often poor. Sediment movement alters riverbeds. Seasonal flow changes reshape shorelines. Dive operations are limited by safety regulations. Reports typically state that waterways were searched to the extent possible without specifying unresolved sections. Administrative redactions further reduce available information. When records are released under the Freedom of Information Act, personal identifiers and sensitive details are often removed. This includes portions of interviews, internal communications, and investigative assessments. Researchers and journalists receive partial documents that reflect policy compliance rather than full transparency. Some files contain references to supplementary materials that are not publicly accessible. These may include internal emails, photographs, or briefing notes. Unless specifically requested and approved, these items remain restricted. Their absence leaves gaps in the public version of the record. Time also affects record completeness. Older cases, particularly those from before widespread digital archiving, may rely on handwritten notes and microfilm copies. Some materials have been lost, damaged, or misfiled. Park administrators have acknowledged in internal audits that record preservation varies by region and era. Funding and staffing limitations influence documentation depth. During periods of high visitor volume or multiple simultaneous incidents, record-keeping may be prioritized toward active operations. Detailed narrative reports may be deferred or abbreviated. Later reviews rely on these condensed entries. Interagency files are not always integrated. When local law enforcement or state agencies participate, they maintain separate records. Information sharing occurs, but complete consolidation is rare. Some relevant materials remain outside National Park Service archives. Legal considerations also shape documentation. In cases where litigation is possible, language may be deliberately restrained. Reports avoid speculative statements. Interpretive analysis is minimized. The result is a factual but limited account. Public databases maintained by the National Park Service list names, dates, and general locations for unresolved cases. These summaries provide accessibility but omit operational detail. They are intended for awareness rather than investigation. Family correspondence sometimes appears in files, but it is inconsistent. Some families maintain long-term contact with park officials. Others disengage. Requests for reinvestigation may be documented without resulting action. Emotional content is usually excluded from formal records. Over time, unresolved files become administratively dormant. Updates occur only when new information is received. Many remain unchanged for decades. Annual reviews may confirm their status without adding new material. The structure of these records reflects institutional priorities. They are designed to document response, compliance, and safety. They are not intended to provide comprehensive personal histories or narrative explanations. As a result, large portions of each case remain undocumented. What is present is precise. Dates are verified. Locations are mapped. Personnel assignments are listed. What is absent is equally consistent. Motivations, internal decision-making processes, and unrecorded environmental variations are rarely captured. These absences do not indicate negligence. They reflect the limits of administrative systems operating in remote environments. The files show how searches were conducted and when they ended. They do not resolve uncertainty. Across different parks and decades, this pattern remains stable. Case files preserve operational facts and omit interpretive context. They record activity without explanation. They leave unanswered elements in place. How time alters every investigation. In missing person cases within national parks, time is treated as a measurable operational factor. Search and rescue manuals emphasize that the first 24 to 72 hours after a disappearance are critical for evidence preservation and survivability assessment. After this initial period, environmental processes and logistical constraints begin to alter the investigative landscape. During the early phase of a search, physical indicators such as footprints, disturbed vegetation, dropped objects, and scent trails are most likely to be present. These indicators degrade quickly. Wind disperses soil, rain flattens grass, and washes away impressions. Temperature changes affect scent molecules. Wildlife movement disrupts ground patterns. NPS after-action reports consistently note that evidence visibility decreases sharply after the first 48 hours. In mountainous parks such as Yosemite and Mount Rainier, snowfall accelerates this process. Snow can cover tracks within hours. Subsequent melting and refreezing obscure underlying surfaces. Once snowpack accumulates beyond a certain depth, ground searching becomes impractical. Files from winter incidents often record suspension of operations until seasonal thaw. In desert environments such as the Grand Canyon, heat and solar exposure affect evidence differently. Organic materials degrade rapidly. Fabric fades, paper deteriorates, plastic becomes brittle. Wind redistribution of sand alters surface features. Water scarcity limits both human movement and evidence preservation. Search logs frequently mention dehydration risks that restrict field time. Water systems introduce additional temporal effects. Objects entering rivers or streams may be transported long distances within hours. Seasonal runoff increases flow velocity. Flood events reshape channels. Dive team reports indicate that submerged evidence becomes increasingly difficult to locate after the first week. Sediment deposition and debris accumulation conceal objects. As time passes, operational priorities shift. During active searches, resources are concentrated on rapid coverage. Personnel numbers are high. Aircraft hours are allocated. Volunteers are mobilized. After the initial phase, these resources decline. Budget constraints and competing emergencies require reallocation. The transition to limited continuous mode marks a formal change in time management. Under this status, intensive searching stops. Periodic patrols continue. Information is monitored. Public notices remain active. This phase may last indefinitely. Many unresolved cases have remained in limited mode for more than 20 years. Administrative records show that most active searches last between 3 days and 3 weeks. Duration depends on terrain, weather, and probability assessments. Once planners determine that additional coverage is unlikely to yield results, command staff recommend suspension. These recommendations are reviewed and approved by regional administrators. Seasonal cycles further influence investigations. In alpine parks, summer is the primary search window. High elevation zones may be inaccessible from October through May. In desert parks, extreme summer heat restricts daytime operations. Winter months may offer safer temperatures but shorter daylight hours. Long-term evidence degradation affects later reinvestigation efforts. Items recovered years after a disappearance often lack forensic value. Exposure to moisture, sunlight, and biological activity damages DNA and fiber structures. Laboratory reports in older cases frequently state that samples are unsuitable for analysis. Technological changes also interact with time. GPS devices, satellite phones, and emergency beacons were uncommon before the early 2000s. Older cases lack digital location data. Even when devices existed, storage formats may become obsolete. Data recovery from outdated equipment is often unsuccessful. Institutional memory diminishes over time. Rangers and investigators retire or transfer. Personnel who participated in original searches may no longer be available for consultation. Knowledge stored informally through experience is lost. New staff rely on written records, which may be incomplete. Case files are periodically reviewed, but these reviews are usually administrative. They verify status and compliance with retention policies. Substantive reinvestigation requires new evidence. Without it, files remain unchanged. Internal audits show that only a small percentage of dormant cases are reopened. Public attention follows similar patterns. Media coverage is highest during active searches. As time passes, reporting decreases. Anniversaries may prompt renewed interest, but sustained coverage is rare. Families sometimes initiate independent searches years later, but these efforts face the same environmental constraints. Legal frameworks also impose time-related limits. Statutes of limitation affect certain investigative actions. Funding cycles influence resource availability. Grant-supported projects may operate for fixed periods. After expiration, specialized teams may be disbanded. In some cases, delayed discovery occurs. Human remains or personal effects are occasionally found years after a disappearance. These discoveries are often made by hikers, hunters, or maintenance crews. Reports indicate that such finds typically occur in areas previously considered low probability or inaccessible. When remains are located after long periods, identification may require forensic anthropology and dental records. These processes take time and may be inconclusive. Environmental exposure complicates analysis. Some cases remain unidentified despite recovery. Time also affects mapping accuracy. Trails are rerouted. Vegetation patterns change. Landslides alter topography. Fire events reshape large areas. Search maps from earlier decades may no longer correspond precisely to current conditions. Planners must account for these changes during any renewed activity. Budget documents show that long-term case management receives limited dedicated funding. Resources are prioritized for current incidents. Archival maintenance and periodic review are integrated into general administrative functions rather than specialized programs. Data storage practices evolve. Paper files are digitized. Digital formats are migrated. Errors can occur during these processes. Missing attachments and corrupted files are documented in internal reviews. Over decades, information loss is cumulative. The passage of time also influences public records access. Some documents become eligible for release under federal transparency laws. Others remain restricted due to privacy protections. Redactions increase as sensitivity assessments change. Across multiple parks, time-related patterns appear consistently. Early stages are resource-intensive. Evidence declines rapidly. Operational activity diminishes. Records stabilize. Cases enter long-term archival status. These developments are reflected in annual reports and internal evaluations. They describe time as a limiting factor rather than a variable to be overcome. No procedural mechanism exists to reverse environmental degradation or restore lost information. Search and rescue systems are designed for immediate response. They are not structured for indefinite investigation. Once time passes beyond certain thresholds, recovery probabilities decline. This assessment is documented without interpretation. The role of time is recorded in suspension notices, review memos, and archival classifications. It appears as a numerical measure: days searched, months inactive, years unresolved. It shapes decisions and defines institutional boundaries. Within official records, time is neither framed as failure nor success. It is treated as a condition that alters operational capacity. The files reflect how investigations adapt as hours become years and years become decades. Those who pursued answers beyond official operations. When National Park Service search efforts transition to limited continuous mode, formal field operations largely cease. At that point, responsibility for continued inquiry often shifts outside institutional structures. Families, volunteers, nonprofit organizations, and independent researchers become the primary sources of ongoing activity. Their involvement is documented in correspondence files, public records, and media reports associated with unresolved cases. Family members are usually the first to continue searching. After active operations end, many relatives return to park areas independently. Some organize small search parties. Others revisit trailheads, campgrounds, and visitor centers to gather additional information. These activities are typically informal and conducted without official authorization. Park administrators often advise families about safety and access restrictions, but do not supervise these efforts. Records show that families frequently submit written requests for renewed searches. These letters are addressed to park superintendents, regional directors, or the investigative services branch. Responses are standardized. They summarize prior operations and state that additional action requires new evidence. Copies of these exchanges are preserved in administrative files. In several documented cases, relatives have hired private investigators. These investigators review available records, interview witnesses, and conduct independent site visits. Their reports are sometimes shared with park authorities. However, NPS policy does not require formal evaluation of privately commissioned findings unless they contain verifiable new information. Volunteer search organizations also play a role. Groups such as the National Association for Search and Rescue, local mountain rescue teams, and community-based volunteer units sometimes continue efforts after official suspension. These groups operate under their own governance structures and funding sources. Participation varies depending on regional availability and case visibility. Some volunteer teams specialize in grid searching, aerial photography, or technical rope access. Their operations are documented through internal reports and social media updates. When working within park boundaries, they must obtain permits and coordinate with park officials. Unauthorized activity may result in enforcement action. Nonprofit organizations focused on missing persons have become increasingly involved since the early 2000s. Groups such as the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, the DOE Network, and regional advocacy organizations maintain databases and distribute case information. These platforms compile official records, family statements, and public tips. NamUs, administered by the U.S. Department of Justice, serves as a central repository for missing person and unidentified remains cases. Park-related disappearances are often entered into this system. Data fields include physical descriptions, dental records, DNA availability, and last known location. Families and law enforcement agencies can submit updates. The DOE Network and similar organizations rely on volunteer researchers. These individuals analyze case materials, compare records, and assist with public outreach. Their work is conducted independently of park authorities. While not part of official investigations, their databases are used by journalists and private researchers. Independent researchers represent another category of involvement. Some individuals compile case lists, map disappearance locations, and analyze publicly available data. Their findings are published on websites, blogs, and in self-produced reports. These projects vary in methodological rigor. Some rely exclusively on official documents. Others incorporate interviews and anecdotal material. Journalists also contribute to long-term inquiry. Investigative reporters have used public records requests to obtain internal communications, operational summaries, and archival materials. Media organizations such as the New York Times, Outside Magazine, and regional newspapers have published detailed accounts of unresolved park cases. These reports sometimes prompt renewed attention from authorities. In a few instances, public exposure has led to supplemental searches or forensic reviews. However, most media coverage documents existing information rather than generating new evidence. Crowdsourced information platforms have expanded participation. Online forums, social media groups, and mapping projects allow users to share documents, photographs, and theories. Moderation practices vary. Some groups restrict discussion to verified information. Others permit speculative content. Park officials do not formally engage with these platforms. Financial constraints influence external search activity. Independent operations rely on donations, personal funds, or grant support. Equipment costs, travel expenses, and insurance requirements limit sustained involvement. Many volunteer efforts diminish after initial enthusiasm declines. Legal and regulatory barriers also shape participation. Wilderness areas restrict mechanized access. Drone usage is prohibited in most national parks without special authorization. Excavation and artifact removal are illegal. These regulations limit the scope of independent searches. Families often encounter these constraints when attempting long-term exploration. Correspondence files include records of denied permit applications for off-trail searching, climbing access, or underwater operations. Denials cite safety concerns and environmental protection rules. Some families pursue legal remedies. Lawsuits seeking access to records or challenging search termination decisions appear periodically in federal court records. Outcomes vary. Courts generally defer to agency discretion unless procedural violations are demonstrated. Public memorials and information campaigns are another form of continued involvement. Trailhead posters, online memorial pages, and anniversary events keep cases visible. Park regulations restrict permanent signage, but temporary notices are sometimes permitted. Academic researchers occasionally examine unresolved cases as part of broader studies on wilderness safety and search methodology. Their work focuses on statistical patterns, response efficiency, and environmental factors. Individual case narratives are usually anonymized. Advocacy organizations also lobby for policy changes. Proposals have included expanded funding, centralized databases, and standardized reporting formats. Congressional hearings and oversight reports reference missing person cases periodically. Implementation of reforms varies. Communication between external participants and park authorities is formalized through designated liaison officers. Emails and letters document information exchange. Submissions are evaluated for relevance. Verified leads may be forwarded to investigators. Unsubstantiated claims are archived without action. In some cases, cooperation persists for decades. Families maintain regular contact with park staff. Annual updates are exchanged. New technologies are discussed. DNA submissions are coordinated. These interactions are recorded in long-term case management files. Other cases see declining engagement. Relatives move, age, or disengage. Volunteer groups shift focus. Media interest fades. Administrative records reflect reduced correspondence frequency. Files remain technically active, but operationally dormant. Recovered remains sometimes result from external discovery. Hunters, hikers, maintenance crews, and private landowners occasionally report finds. These discoveries are processed through law enforcement channels. External search efforts are rarely the direct cause, but awareness campaigns may contribute indirectly. The involvement of non-institutional participants introduces variability into long-term investigations. Their methods, resources, and priorities differ. Some efforts are systematic, others are intermittent. All operate outside formal command structures. Official records acknowledge these activities, but do not integrate them into standard procedures. Supplemental reports may be attached to case files. Recommendations are evaluated individually. No centralized mechanism exists to coordinate external participation. Across parks and decades, this pattern is consistent. When institutional searching ends, responsibility diffuses. Families, volunteers, researchers, and advocates continue in parallel. Their work is documented, but not directed by park authorities. These parallel efforts expand the informational environment surrounding unresolved cases. They preserve public awareness. They generate additional documentation. They sometimes produce new evidence. More often, they reinforce existing records. Within administrative archives, these materials appear as appendices, correspondence folders, and supplemental submissions. They reflect sustained human involvement after formal operations conclude. They demonstrate how unresolved cases extend beyond institutional timelines. Official systems close phases. External participants maintain continuity. Their activities become part of the historical record, even when outcomes remain unchanged. How cases are closed without resolution. Within the National Park Service, unresolved missing person cases eventually enter a phase defined primarily by administrative classification. When active searches and limited continuous efforts have concluded, files are transferred into long-term records management systems. At this stage, the investigation is no longer operational. It becomes part of an archival process governed by federal documentation standards, retention schedules, and institutional review procedures. Formal closure does not mean a case is solved. Instead, it indicates that no further routine field activity is planned. Internal memoranda document this transition. These records list dates of suspension, coverage achieved, and responsible officials. The case status is usually marked as inactive, administratively closed, or pending new information. Each designation carries specific reporting requirements, but does not imply final determination. The Investigative Services Branch retains oversight of unresolved files. Agents review them periodically to ensure compliance with evidence handling and retention policies. Physical items are stored in controlled facilities. Digital materials are archived in secure databases. Access is restricted to authorized personnel. These systems are designed to preserve information indefinitely, even when investigative activity has ceased. Case reviews occur at scheduled intervals. Some parks conduct internal evaluations every 5 or 10 years. These reviews confirm that records remain complete and properly stored. They also verify that contact information for next of kin is current. If new forensic technologies become available, selected files may be reassessed. Such reviews are documented but rarely lead to reopening without new evidence. When human remains or personal effects are discovered years later, administrative processes are reactivated. Law enforcement protocols govern recovery and identification. Forensic laboratories analyze materials when possible. If identification is confirmed, case status is updated. Correspondence files, record notification procedures, and coordination with families and medical examiners. If no discovery occurs, classification remains unchanged. Annual statistical reports continue to list unresolved cases as part of cumulative totals. Some parks maintain internal summaries of long-term inactive files. These documents serve budgeting, training, and compliance purposes. They do not include interpretive analysis. Families are notified when cases enter inactive status. Standardized letters explain that active searching has concluded, but that records remain open to new information. These communications are filed. Subsequent updates are sent if significant developments occur. Many families continue contact for years. Others disengage. Both patterns appear in archival correspondence. Legal closure is distinct from administrative classification. In the absence of remains, courts may issue declarations of death after statutory waiting periods. These proceedings are initiated by families and handled in civil court. Park authorities are not involved in these decisions. Court outcomes do not alter investigative files unless documentation is provided. Archival management follows federal schedules. Permanent records are transferred to regional repositories and later to the National Archives. Temporary records are retained for specified periods. Destruction occurs only when authorized. Audit reports monitor compliance. Errors are corrected through supplemental documentation. Training programs use closed cases for instructional purposes. After-action summaries are anonymized and incorporated into coursework. These materials focus on response procedures, terrain challenges, and safety issues. Individual identities are usually removed. The intent is operational improvement rather than case resolution. Institutional language in final files is standardized. Phrases such as "no further leads," "search suspended," and "case inactive" appear consistently. These terms reflect procedural status. They do not express evaluation or judgment. They indicate administrative endpoints within established systems. Over decades, Large numbers of such files accumulate. Each represents a completed sequence of reporting, searching, reviewing, and archiving. Together, they form a permanent record of institutional activity. They document how agencies respond when outcomes remain uncertain. Budget reports and policy reviews occasionally reference these archives. Unresolved cases are cited as justification for equipment upgrades, training investments, and database integration projects. They are treated as indicators of environmental and operational complexity rather than individual failures. Public summaries reflect this final classification. Websites list names and dates without additional narrative. Databases display static entries. Updates occur only when confirmed information is received. For most cases, entries remain unchanged for decades. From an administrative perspective, closure marks the transition from active management to long-term preservation. Files move from operational desks to archival systems. Responsibility shifts from search coordinators to records officers. The case becomes part of institutional memory. These records remain accessible within regulatory limits. They may be reviewed, released in part, or cited in future studies. They are maintained as factual documentation of events and responses. They do not resolve unanswered questions. The final status reflects procedural boundaries. Agencies respond within available resources, document their actions, and preserve their findings. When those actions conclude, the file remains as evidence of what was done and what could not be determined. In this way, unresolved cases are neither erased nor concluded. They are classified, stored, and monitored. They persist as fixed entries in administrative systems. Their presence reflects the limits of investigation in complex environments and the long-term structures created to manage uncertainty. If this video made you think differently about places you thought were safe, take a moment to reflect on what we've seen here. Many of these questions are still unanswered, and new cases continue to appear. For more real, in-depth video like this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who loves hiking. Thanks for watching.